Welcome back, everybody, to Post Wrestling. It's John Pollock, and returning here to Post Wrestling, a friend of the show. He is the co-author of their latest series of books. This one, The Eighth Wonder of the World, the true story of Andre the Giant, along with Bertrand Hebert. He is Pat Laprade, who joins us. Pat, how are you doing today?
Very good. Very good yourself, John.
You are on the media run, as we say, and doing interviews left, right, and center. I will say that when it comes to a book launch, there is no one that hits the media pavement quite like Pat Laprade.
I appreciate that, and it's even wilder than just a book launch, just because of the Dino Bravo Dark Side of the Ring documentary. I mean, it's crazy. It's a crazy week.
When did you realize that the Dino Bravo episode, which we'll definitely touch upon that, was going to be running in such close proximity to the launch of the book? Like, this had to have been partly just sheer coincidence that here you have two things you're significantly involved with, and they're coming out a week apart from one another.
I realized it yesterday when I had so many messages and tweets and Instagram and everything that I had to answer back. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just crazy, because, I mean, everything in the past month or so felt like it happened 3 months ago. You know, I spent 3 weeks at home and it felt like 3 months. So, I mean, you know, everything is kind of, you know, unbalanced right now. And yeah, I really didn't realize that, you know, book launch and the Bravo doc would be so close and would gather so much attention from the media.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this the other day because, you know, with the unfortunate news of Howard Finkel's passing, it took me back to that convention that they had in Toronto back in 2012. And that was the one and only time I met Howard Finkel, but it also made me remember that was the first time I ever met you, was at that convention where I ended up interviewing you, and you were promoting the future release of Mad Dogs, Midgets, and Screwjobs.
I will always remember that interview because Bertrand Hebert was with me as well, and after the interview he told me, geez, even I want to buy the book now. Oh yeah, I do remember that. And I went from Toronto to Vegas because it was the Cauliflower Alley Club.
That's right.
That same week. So Howard was there as well. So I don't remember talking to him that much in Toronto, but I remember sitting with him in Las Vegas. And I mean, he remembered my name in Vegas, and then I met with him in Boston. There was a Hall of Fame ceremony in Boston, I want to say maybe 6 to 8 months later, or maybe, I don't remember exactly, but a few months later, and he did remember my name again. So that was one of the, and I wasn't the only one, you know. I mean, Howard was so good at this, you know, remember everyone's name and making them feel special. And he was such a nice person, so fun to talk to, and so knowledgeable about the business. So yeah, it's a big loss.
Yeah, and it's just been this awful stretch of, you know, a lot of people that have passed away in such a short period of time. And, you know, I saw Greg Oliver note this as well. It's just like a lot of history that is gone as well, which I mean is obviously secondary to the personal loss. But when you talk about, you know, some interesting figures, when you incorporate a Joe Pedicino or a Jack Lotz, like not the most well-known names, but ones that, and Howard Finkel, of course, as well, like that amount of history, it's just astounding.
Yeah, well, I mean, Quebec wrestling was hit pretty hard last year in 2019 with Fernand Fréchette and Jacques Rougeau Sr. And René Goulet, and I'm forgetting one, but I mean, that's the reason, John, that me and Bertrand did the first book on Montreal wrestling, because we didn't want those stories to be gone forever. And you know, since we released the book, look at the list of people that we interviewed that are not here anymore: Frenchy Martin, Mad Dog Vachon, Jacques Rougeau Sr. So I mean, you know, it's we wanted to speak with, those former wrestlers, former personalities, and we wanted them to tell us their story in order to make sure that they were not forgotten forever.
These projects, and I would 100% recommend all of yourself and Bertrand's books, because they're such, for me personally, like they're such valuable resources. And I just want to put the timeline in place for those listening. Of course, many people, they saw your involvement with the HBO documentary on Andre the Giant. What came first? Were you already working on the book as that project came about, and you were working kind of on these two projects on Andre's life?
After after the Mad Dog Vachon book, we thought of doing an Andre the Giant book, but I don't think it was the right timing. So we were told, we're not really sure if this is the right timing to do so. So I started working on Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, the history of women's wrestling, and then Bertrand started working on Accepted, Pat Patterson's biography. So, and then my involvement in the HBO documentary arrived. So, right after I was done taping with the crew, I called ECW. Well, I spoke to Bertrand first, but then we called ECW Press, and we're like, "Hey, listen, I think this is the right timing now. I'm, field producer on the documentary. That would bring something else to the table that maybe ECW Press thought it was missing the first time around. So we got the green light very, very quickly, and I want to say that we started working on the book somewhere in 2018. So by the time the documentary was on the air, I think that we have just started working on the book, or we're about to start, around that time. So, but definitely my involvement, if I wasn't involved in the HBO doc, or if there was no HBO doc, I'm not even sure if the book would have seen would have been published.
One of the things I enjoy so much about your work, Pat, is that you are such a stickler for accuracy and details. And when you add the title, The True Story of Andre the Giant, had this always been a fascinating figure to yourself, that you always felt that there's so much mythology around Andre that it's just so daunting to even approach this and try and find out what is true and what is not? And that, to me, is going to be the consistent praise of this book, is the fact that you go to so many different sources and get to the bottom of some of the most obscure facts about Andre, but ones that are just wrestling in general exaggerates, but with Andre, it's tenfold.
There's two things that I really wanted to make sure that this book would be about. The first one is, I always thought that Montreal was never real. The story of Andre in Montreal was never really told. It was never said in the way that it was supposed to. And I mean, the HBO doc is probably the piece of work that I spoken the most about Andre in Montreal. So props to Jason and the crew. But again, there's so much you can do in a 86-minute documentary. So I understood the limitations there. But if you look at, you remember we did a book maybe 10 years ago on Andre. It was a recollection of his matches, almost like play-by-play of all those matches. And there's like, I want to say 30 pages from the day he was born to the day he arrived in working for Vince Sr. in 1973. We have 11 chapters. We have more than 100 pages for that same period of time. So that was very, very important for us to go in as many details as we could, because none other book and none other documentary, and again, documentary has its time limitation, which we understood. But there was never a book that went that many details. And again, Bugs Brown did a fantastic job with the graphic novel, and I love every bit of it. But again, there were still tales and myths that were told in this graphic novel. So the first thing was to make sure that Montreal would get the right place this time, and the other thing was to make sure that all the myths and all the tales were going to be debunked. And I mean, when you realize that the birth certificate was, didn't have the name that Andre was supposed to have, when you realize that if you go everywhere online, it will tell you that Andre passed away on January 27th when he did pass away on January 28th. That's crazy. That's crazy that simple stuff as, a death certificate, as a birth certificate, as a cover of a magazine, there's so many things that were, I mean, even say that Andre the Giant got his back surgery, before WrestleMania 3. And it's not true. He got the surgery after. So for us, for Bertrand and I, it's very important because you won't look at WrestleMania 3 the same way if you know that Andre was almost begging for his life to get that surgery because he was in so much pain, but still did the match, than if you know that he had the surgery before. You know what I mean? I mean, the guy still did one of the, if not the biggest matches, the biggest match of his career with, at a moment in his life where, what he needed was a back surgery, and he still performed. So you don't look at things the same way when you know all the facts. So it was very important for us to give those facts to the reader.
And with Andre, like sometimes it takes a lot of time to get into so many of these details. I mean, just when I'm reading about, the difference in like just the date of him going, down to the US, and you've got like the date that it's represented in a different form from day, month, year to month, day, year, and just
because it was a big issue online, John. I remember reading all about it because people were wondering when exactly Andre started working for Vince Sr., and they came up with something in they came up with, I don't remember the exact date, but it was just a matter that in French, it's a month, year, but in English it's month, day, year. So it was just a matter that the first two numbers were flipped and misunderstood, and there you go. Instead of thinking that he started in March, he might have started in September. That's just because you flipped the two numbers. So it was very important for us to explain where this error came from and why you're going to read that Andre had started working for Vince at another day. Because the other thing I wanted to make sure, John, is the fact that we're coming up with so many new information, and probably information that we were the first ones or the only ones to mention. So we didn't want people to start doubting what we were going to bring up, as far as new information. So if we explain why the other information that is available is there's an error, if we explain the error and how it came up to that, well, people will understand, and there will be no doubt anymore. But I'll tell you something, and I think I never said that yet in any interviews. Can you believe that WWE doesn't even have the right date of Vince McMahon Sr.'s death?
That's unbelievable when you think about that.
Because Vince was an important part of Andre's career. He was a friend. He was friends with Andre. So at one point, we wanted to mention that Vince Sr. has passed away, and I was about to write the date, and I did some research, and I was like, okay, why do I have two different dates here? So I dig, and I went to old newspapers, and there you go. I found the right date, which was not the date that I was able to find through WWE's website.
Has Andre when you look at the significant figures that you have done these enormous research projects covering, is Andre kind of at the top of the list when it comes to untangling myth from reality? And does it also make you look at different accepted facts and look at history that, especially in professional wrestling, there is an element of that broken telephone history that I'm sure we could look into many different sports histories that there is somewhat. Is it especially concentrated in a figure like Andre, or do you find like there's been a lot when you lift up that rock and see what's underneath?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know how wrestlers are, I mean, Ray Stevens once said, if a story, I want to get this right, but it's something like, if a story is good enough to be told, it's good enough to be exaggerated. So I mean, we did the book on Mad Dog Vachon, right? And listening to Mad Dog Vachon interviews over the years, some stories you could just feel the exaggeration as the years went by. So if it was, so the rule of thumb with Mad Dog Vachon was that the earliest he told a story, that was the closest to the truth. So if he told a story in 1970, let's say something happened in 63. If he told the story in 1970, 1980, and 1990, we'll take the 1970 interview, because that was the one closest to the real truth. Because with time, some details are forgotten, and he had the tendency to exaggerate the story. So that was the trick with Mad Dog Vachon. But the difference with Vachon is that we were, it wasn't the same kind of myths and tales. It was just stories, the famous plane story in the AWA, or stuff like that. With Andre, it was real facts. A back surgery. It's not just a plane accident and what really happened in there. It's a date. It was more precise, as far as the information goes.
Narrowing in on Montreal, I mean, such a huge part of Montreal's history is that early 70s period when you have Grand Prix and All-Star Wrestling. And can you just kind of paint the picture of where Andre fit into that war at the time as, a very significant piece on the chessboard for that war?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, some people will say that, Andre was the reason why Grand Prix was so successful, and the reason why Grand Prix was able to be number one in Montreal for a year or so, back in 1972, early 73. Other people will tell you that, it wasn't just Andre, that it was also Maurice and Paul Vachon's, contact with it, within the business. But definitely, All-Star Wrestling, when you look at both rosters, the thing that really differentiated the both rosters, Andre, All-Star Wrestling didn't have a so-called 7'4", 420 pounds wrestler. So, I'm sorry, and they were trying. I mean, they brought the Maguire twins, which, thinking that, they would be able to draw, the attention that Andre was, but the Maguire twins didn't know how to work. So that's the big difference between Andre and them. And Andre was completely different as well, It was not just because he was tall, but his proportion, his dimensions were so different. It was everywhere, his hands, his head, his chest, everything was different about Andre. He was not just a 7 foot tall guy, weighing 280 pounds, a lean guy. He was that back in France, but he was not that in Montreal.
And Paul Vachon, I mean, you really do shine a spotlight on his, the Vachon's influence on Andre, and serving as that bridge of getting Andre to Vince McMahon Sr. And those two kind of, maybe in Andre's history, don't play enough of a role in terms of like their influence of getting Andre to the States and also having the understanding of seeing Andre as this attraction, which, Vince Sr. would very much borrow from that playbook and realizing how best to utilize Andre in limited as an attraction.
Yeah, there were so many stories about that. Who brought Andre to Vince, and so many stuff that were created in Montreal first, and then popularized in New York by Vince Sr.
Mm-hmm.
But with time, it became that, it started in New York, like the 7'4", like coming from the French Alps and stuff like that, from Grenoble and all that. I mean, there was even the Eighth Wonder of the World was something that was used by the ring announcer of Grand Prix Wrestling before Andre started going to New York. So there were so many stories going on about, and it wasn't the right story. So it was important for us to actually paint the real picture about, what really happened with Andre in Montreal and who did what. And Carpentier was, with years, Carpentier always tried to add the good role here, because he was from France. He was the one who discovered Andre, and he was the one who brought him to Vince Sr. But in reality, it was all the Vachons, it was the Vachons in New York in February of 1973, in January of 73, and talking to Vince about Andre. And a lot of people thought it was even Vern. That a lot of people thought that Vern, because Vern saw Andre in Japan in January of 1970, before the Vachons had heard of him, but Vern didn't share that information with the Vachons. So Vern wasn't interested in bringing Andre back then. He wanted Andre to box. He didn't want him as a wrestler. So many people thought that because the Vachons were working for the AWA, that Vern, told them about Andre, but that was not the case. It's actually the opposite. When Andre started working in Montreal, the Vachons sent Andre to Vern. So that whole story needed to be told, the right way, once and for all, and that's pretty much what we try to do here.
When it comes to the key, power brokers that at different points of his career Andre was associated with, we mentioned the Vachons and
Yep.
Vince Sr., Vince Jr., Frank Valois as well. Is there, at the end of this story, do you look at one specific figure that had Andre not come into contact with this person, it may have been a drastically different career? Is there one person that does, at the end of all of this, stand a bit above the others?
I would say Yoshihara in Japan. Yeah, that you didn't name. That was very, very important in Andre's early career. Because, Yoshihara went to, he was the promoter for IWE, which was at the time in 1970 the second biggest promotion in Japan. It was before New Japan and All Japan started. And he went to France because he had good, he was sharing talent with the promoters in Europe. And he went to a match in Paris. And Andre was working there, and Yoshihara saw Andre and was like, "Oh my gosh, I want this guy in Japan." So Andre already had commitments to go to England. So that was in May of 1969, and in January of 1970, he was making his first trip to Japan, and Japan was so instrumental to Andre's career. That's where he ended his career. That's where he wrestled from 1970 to 1992. Wrestled 22 years. That's where he was a heel. You got to remember when Andre turned heel before WrestleMania 3, people were so in shock. But in Japan, he was a heel his whole career. So he already knew how to work as a heel. He knew what to do to make a good heel work. And I'm sure that it was so important that Andre knew how to work as such when he had this feud with Hogan, and the feud really worked perfectly because, at the time, Andre wasn't the same performer in the ring, but he was still able to be a very good heel. He could act the part. He couldn't maybe play the, I don't want to say play, but he could play the part, but he couldn't really, he wasn't the same in the ring, physically, and, as an athlete, he wasn't the same, but he could still act and could still do a very good heel character. And because he had, by 1987, he had 17 years of experience in Japan. So to me, Japan was something that sometimes is overlooked about Andre's career, and Yoshi-Hara in particular is probably a promoter. We all know about the Vachon and the Valois and the, I think something that was really important, and I'm pretty sure that Andre would agree with this, because twice in the 1970s, after Andre was working for New Japan exclusively, when Andre heard that Yoshi-Hara had trouble with his company, he went to work for him twice, and he couldn't say no, because it didn't really matter in the sense that IWE wasn't a competition for him anymore, but he didn't want to say no to Andre because it was Andre. It wasn't worth taking this fight with Andre, so he let him go. But twice Andre decided without Yoshi-Hara asking. So that tells me that he was very, very important to Andre.
When you were speaking to like so many different interview subjects, and specifically ones in the industry that were around him, we talk about how people can lean on legendary status of Andre, but you also try and get to stories that do not paint Andre in a great light. There's the Alan Coage story on the bus, as well as other incidents as well. Did you find it to be difficult when it came to a critical analysis of Andre from those that were around him, where he's very much held in such a high regard as this mythical figure among those that knew him?
You cannot do a true story and a real story if you don't talk about every side and all the good side and the bad side of a person. We did the same thing with Mad Dog Vachon. Mm-hmm. In Mad Dog Vachon's book, we were telling the story that he once hit his wife. And it leads to something else, but still, it leads to a good thing. But it was important for us to mention that story in the book. So same goes with Andre. It wasn't easy because, there's it was another era. It was at a time where people could say more things than today. Not that it was a good idea, but I'm just saying that people were less criticized for some of the things that they could get away with a bunch of stuff that today is seen completely differently. So it was talking about racism is never an easy thing. And probably it's even worse today, because we are more we realize more and more, what can be done, and even, like the Piper thing, because we talk about that with WrestleMania 6,
yeah.
The blackface that he did, we had to be very careful in how we were going to say it, because today that couldn't happen today.
No.
But back in 1990, it did happen. And, probably that some people didn't like it, rightfully so. But at the same time, it didn't create, it wasn't much of a big deal. But today would be. So I mean, you always have to be careful when you touch, those kind of subjects. And the thing that we wanted the most is that we didn't want people to think that Andre was a racist, because no one ever said that Andre was racist. Not Bad News Brown, not Kamala. But on two occasions, he didn't say the right things. He made mistakes. And it only shows that he was human. He was a giant of a man, but he was he was a human being as well, with his flaws and making mistakes. And I think it's important to mention that as well, because those kind of things, you know, and with both Alan and with Kamala, Andre, you know, settled everything. Everything was fine, you know, by the end of it. But you know, it was something that needed to be said.
Did you and Bertrand have any existing relationship, or had spoken to members of his family prior to this project, or was this when you first made contact with them? Because I think they had so much that no other wrestlers are going to be able to provide, you know, shine a light on as they could.
Yeah, Andre's nephew Boris came to the Mad Dog Vachon Book Lounge in Montreal. And I remember, I'll always remember this. I really thought that he was just some stupid guy trying to make me believe that he was really Andre the Giant's nephew. And I was like, what is he talking about? Andre the Giant's nephew in Montreal? Get out of here, you know? And well, he was right, you know, Boris Rusimov, and he was living, my gosh, 10 minutes from where I was living.
I imagine you doing like a background check on this guy, getting all his whole history and doing a whole investigation into this guy.
But it was, no, but actually that's something and it's only months after that I was talking to Bertrand, and I think it's Bertrand actually who did that background check or something, and he was like, "No, the guy is legit." I was like, "What? Really?" And when the HBO documentary approached me, I mean, they were already in talks with a few of one of Andre's nieces in France, but it wasn't really going well with them. So I spoke with Boris, and I was like, "Hey, you know, is there any way we can actually, you know, go in France and interview your father?" And it was like, "Yeah, sure, you know, we can make that happen." And actually, Boris didn't make the cut, but he was also interviewed for the documentary, but he didn't make the cut at the end. But we went to France, and we interviewed his father, Antoine, and his wife, Hortense, and then we met with another brother, Jacques. And so I had met both of them during the HBO doc. So when the book came, we got the green light for the book. I went back to France, and I sat down again with those two guys, because, you know, there was more stuff that I wanted to ask that we couldn't for the documentary, because there was no way we would, you know, go into that many details, and rightfully so for a documentary. But for a book, that's what good about a book, that you can go into so many details. So I went back there, sat down with them. They told me a bunch of other stories, and Boris was also very helpful, because he was the only one from the family to actually do research on his great grandparents and great great grandparents from Bulgaria and from Serbia, and he got in touch with some of his cousins over there, so they had information that no one else had, not even members of the family, actually. Probably stories that Andre never knew. So it was instrumental in so many ways, and, you know, I didn't even know he was living 10 minutes from where I was living.
Well, one of the themes that I definitely came away after reading this is that this is a figure that I think there was, you know, it seems like one consistent is that the final years of his life were very, very tough on him, physically and probably mentally as well. Once he is aware of the acromegaly that you go into when he's first made aware of this, and opting not to have the surgery. Like today, that's hardly a death sentence if you get acromegaly, but I think that there was very much a part of him that believed that this was his characteristic, and that if I'm not Andre the Giant, if I'm just Andre, I lose my specialness to so many people. But it was also this burden that he carried to every airport, and every hotel was this size that he lived and ultimately died by.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that Andre was misinformed with this, because I cannot explain it otherwise. The only two reasons he ever gave was God made me the way I am. I don't want to change it, or I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose what made me special, because he thought that getting the surgery would make him lose all of his specialness, and the thickness of his hands and his head and everything. He would have perhaps lost a bit of it, but never to the point where he would have not been Andre the Giant. But he could have probably add, a few good years to his life. Look at the Big Show.
Sure.
He's surpassed Andre's age. So he decided against it. I have no problem thinking that he got misinformed, because it was in Japan, probably through a translator in English. No one there was, speaking French. Andre's English wasn't really good at the time. One could say that it was never good, but that's another story. But when he heard from Dr. Yet in 1981 with his ankle surgery, there's no way that at that time he was not informed properly. So that's a decision he took there. At the same time, we got to remember that, a surgery, it's a brain surgery, so it's a little scary,
Sure.
Especially if you don't have all the implications, if you don't have all the consequences, if you don't understanding them well. So there's that whole thing, it's still a brain surgery. So it's not just something you have to take lightly. But for whatever reason, Andre decided against it and decided to live life, the fullest he can. But by the end of his life, what started as drinking because he wanted to live the life and just being in a party because he knew he was going to die young. Well, it became necessary because drinking was healing, not healing, but it was he wasn't less hurt. He wasn't in as much pain when he was drinking than when he was not. So even his drinking, he started drinking hard liquor at one point because of that, so his whole thinking of, I'm going to party because I don't care, I'm going to die young, became, I need to drink now because, it helps me, keep going. And that's, that to me, that should have been a sign that, maybe I should do something about it.
Do you have any of your own beliefs of, had Andre not passed in 1993 and he got those extra years, as the WWF would turn around later in the 90s, like what kind of role would you have seen him having in wrestling, outside of the ring at this point? As we're going deeper into the 90s, but do you feel that he would have been a figure that would have had a close association? Would he have continued to push things in the ring? He has his final match like just weeks before his passing. Like, do you have any kind of thoughts on just where we would have seen Andre go had he had a few more years?
I don't think he would have stopped. A wrestling locker room was his sanctuary. Mm-hmm. That was a place where he wasn't judged by anyone. That's the only place where he could be himself. He could enjoy it because he wasn't pointed at. He wasn't touched. He wasn't. There were no kids crying or wanted to poke him and to touch him. He wasn't looking as an alien. He was just one of the boys, and that's something that Andre liked more than anything else. So, and that's why he kept going. He didn't know what else to do, and that's the only place where he felt right. So I don't think he would have stopped. He wasn't. He said something like to Jackie McCauley, who was living with Andre with her husband Frenchy Bernard at the time, and he once told her that he wanted to move to Hawaii, wants to be closer to Japan, and the other reason was to be closer to his daughter in Seattle. So Hawaii, felt right because, on top of it, there's like nice weather and the beach and everything. So it could have, helped him, even with his health, maybe, the weather in Hawaii is a better weather than even North Carolina, but thinking the way he was thinking, to get closer to Japan. So I really don't think he had in mind to stop. And that's why also he was so mad about Vince Jr. because Vince Jr. had to take that decision one day that he was not going to use Andre anymore. And at the time, there were no Legends contract, that didn't exist. Probably that today, Vince would have kept him under a Legends contract and Andre would have not gone anywhere. But things like that didn't happen in back in the days, And Andre didn't want to stop wrestling and he wanted to continue. So he went to Mexico, went to Japan, and, I think he would have kept going until his body would have completely shut him down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the bookings would have stopped. I think, there always would have been dates for him to have. It would have been, I think ultimately it would come down to him having to make that decision. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, 1991 or 1992, I think in one of the 2 years, there's a match he did in Japan, a 3-against-3 match. Baba was in the match as well. And, in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, it was like one of the worst match of the year, or one of the worst matches of the year. But in Japan, it was voted like, I don't know, 4th or 5th or 5th best matches that year in Japan. So I mean, in Japan, they were seeing Andre completely differently that we were seeing him here. So he of course, he would have continued to find bookings because there was always somebody who would have, who would have wanted to book Andre the Giant on his card.
I did want to touch just a bit before we wrap up on Dark Side of the Ring that aired this past week that you were heavily involved with, not just on screen, but also behind the scenes, conducting so many of the interviews as well. And just to kind of tie the two together, I mean, you do talk about the relationship or lack thereof between Andre and Dino, that they, there was like a big falling out here with others involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, Dino didn't like the way. Didn't like Andre. He thought that he was not as useful as Gino Brito thought Andre was. That he was slow in the ring and everything, and it was typical wrestling stuff. In the sense that Bravo. Andre was the only one that could really main event a show like Bravo could do at the time in Montreal. And there was some jealousy over it. And since Bravo was also, part owner, he would become part owner of the company, but at the time he wasn't. So, he was just perhaps scared that, Andre would take his spot or something, just typical wrestling stuff that, you see, in every decade in a lot of promotions. But there was a big falling out when Andre and him were in Japan, and when they came back, the relation wasn't the same. And Andre just decided to sell his share of the company and didn't really give any reasons. Gino didn't ask him much of a reason. The only thing Andre said was like, well, I prefer to just walk away, because Andre didn't like confrontations. So if, I don't know, what did he got into an argument with Bravo in Japan? Did he hear some stuff, that Bravo could have said? Because, Bravo was very vocal about Andre. Something happened, and Andre just said, hey, you know what? I don't need this, and I'm just going to sell my share. And ironically, Bravo, he sold his share back to Gino, but Bravo is the one who bought them from Gino. So, Dino just replaced Andre as the third partner in the company in Montreal at the time. and that was pretty much it, But the Bravo documentary was something else, It was different than my implication in the Andre documentary, because there's, as sad as Andre's story can be, I mean, the Bravo story was so different. I mean, the family was involved, and the family, the Gino and Hernandez Dark Side of the Ring documentary, the family really wanted to know what happened to Gino. Was it a murder? Was it a suicide? They really wanted to know. The Brescianos, Diane and her daughter Claudia, didn't want to know.
Yeah.
They don't want to know who did it. That's not why they wanted to be part of the documentary, and that's not what they were looking for from the documentary. They just wanted the story to be told respectfully, and that was one of my roles, in the sense that I did put them in touch with guys like Tony Muley and Gino Brito and that journalist Claude Poirier, and with Claudia as well, because I knew Claudia for a long time by then, because that old stuff was taped in 2018, because it was supposed to be part of the first season, which was supposed to be 10 episodes, and then it was changed to only 6, so the whole project was put on the ice for a while. But back in 2018, I knew Claudia for a number of years already, and I just conducted an interview with her and her mom a few months before, because it was Dino's 25th. It was the 25th anniversary of his passing. So I just did that big article on not the guys, not the wrestling people telling Dino's stories, but his wife and his daughter. So it was a completely different angle. So I knew Claudia needed to be in the documentary, and Jason and Evan, who co-created the series, knew that as well. But Claudia trusted me because she knew me. She didn't know them. And the crazy thing is that the day that we were supposed to film her interview, she backed down. She didn't want to do it anymore. She wasn't sure that that her father would be treated with respect. She didn't know who those two guys were. So props to Evan. He just looked at me and said, "You know what? Call her back and tell her that we're gonna have dinner tonight. Tell her to bring her boyfriend. Me and Jason will be there, and be there as well. And we'll just have a nice dinner, talk about things, and see if she feels comfortable after that." And she agreed to it. And by the end of the dinner, she was all in. She just needed to be reassured that her father was not going to be treated unrespectfully. It wasn't going to be disrespect in the documentary, because the way his life ended, it's a very, very hard and tough story to hear, and I'm glad she did, because Claudia was the star of the show. She killed it there. I mean, by the end, I was the one asking questions, and I wanted to keep one last question for her. And because I asked her the same question when I spoke to her for my article, and I knew what kind of emotion she got into. So I asked her, my very last question was, if you could have your dad for 5 minutes, like if you could see him now, what would you tell him? And that's what she says at the end of the documentary about, that she would tell him that she forgives him, because she understands that he did it for his family. And she starts crying. And man, I watched the documentary twice. I asked the question originally, and I was still get wet eyes just by looking at her answer. And she was so good throughout the documentary. Diane was the first time that she was answering questions in front of a camera. That was something, So I'm very glad that I was able to help being kind of the middleman because between Claudia and Jason and Evan, and they did a fantastic job. And I just think the whole thing was very good.
Do you have any idea, Claudia, has she seen the documentary to your knowledge?
Oh yeah. She saw it. She really enjoyed it. She liked it. She thought that her father was like she wanted. She he was treated with respect. The right story was told, and she really enjoyed it. She wrote to the crew and made sure to let them know that everything was good for her. Everything was good for her mom as well, and it's something that she's really proud of.
I know he's a very polarizing figure, but I do feel like within this documentary and kind of what you are, you have to condense sometimes a lot into a soundbite, summarize something very complex into, a limited amount of time. But I thought Jacques Rougeau, he just seemed to be someone that knew exactly what he was being asked and to really much, paint what it is going to the WWF, what that means. How did you feel Jacques came off in the documentary?
It's funny because I'm not always Jacques' biggest fan, because a lot of things that he says are, how Hogan, nowadays they will tell stories that makes no sense and, facts that can be checked, and Jacques sometimes is pretty much the same, and it's funny because I thought he wasn't that bad in that documentary, but you have no idea how many messages I've received about Jacques, and people didn't like what how Jacques was what Jacques was saying in the document. It was like, really? For once, I thought he was all right. There's a few things here and there, that Jacques got probably exaggerated, or maybe not 100% what it really was, but it wasn't major stuff, people are questioning if Dino really called him the day he died. We don't know. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Jacques says he did. So, I'm going to believe it. And I was trying to find a reason. Why would Dino call Jacques? Because Jacques is right. They were not close, Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I spoke to Jacques earlier today, and I was like, you know what, Jacques? Dino wanted to bring back wrestling in the province of Quebec. That was one of the ideas he had. What if he was calling you about that? Jacques was the only one at the time where he was between two runs. In March of '93, yep. He was not working for the Fed at the time. He was out of his Monty character, and he was 3 months shy of starting with Pierre Carl as the Quebecers. So Rick was still working for the office. Raymond was still working for the office. So who else could he turn to if he wanted to start something in Quebec? And Jacques was like, oh, you know what? Maybe you're right. It makes sense. But we don't know. We'll never know. Because he was probably not calling Jacques to get help because he had trouble with organized crime. That doesn't make sense. And that's what people were thinking. They were like, yeah, right. He called Jacques, on his last day to get. No, that's not what Jacques is saying. He just said that he called him. He doesn't know why he wanted to talk about, but he did call him. So I don't see Jacques inventing that story. It's just coming out, of nowhere. So that's my explanation to it. But for the rest of it, Jacques, the crew liked him because he brings so much energy to a documentary like this. But I thought that Jacques was okay. It was for once I just thought that he did fine.
Locally, is the Dino Bravo story that one that's pretty well known, or is it almost like we're so far removed from it that there are probably a lot of people within Quebec, even of your age or younger, that are not as aware of the details?
No, everybody knows the story. Even my mom was on a wrestling fan, in the 1980s. Know who Dino Bravo was. The only thing is that sometimes people are mixing Dino Bravo and Gino Brito because the name sounds alike.
Okay.
So sometimes they go, Gino Brito, is that the one who got killed? No, that's Dino Bravo. Oh yeah, that's Dino Bravo. I'm going to have that kind of conversation with people, so they're just mixing the two names, but at the same time, they know that one of them got killed. That story, was, they remember that story. Even Kevin Raphael, who I do the TV sports commentary, raw commentary with, and we have a podcast together. Uh-huh. He's much younger. He's 26 or 27. He lives in Laval, where Dino got shot. And he was telling me that in Laval, and he's 27, so he was probably born around 93 or so. So he wasn't even alive. He wasn't even born at the time, but he heard that story, and that's the story in Laval in particular that is getting repeated from generation to generation. So I was like, oh really? Even you heard that? Oh yeah, he said I heard that when I was growing up. So that's really a story. It's still, Bravo was one of the most popular wrestlers in the history of Quebec wrestling. People who only knew him from his WWF days cannot really understand what I'm saying right now. And I understand that. But it's really who he was. Yvon Robert was probably the most popular one. But, aside from Yvon Robert, Johnny Rougeau, Edouard Carpentier, Dino Bravo, and Jacques Rougeau are probably, complete the top 5 most popular wrestler. Did I say Carpentier? Yeah. Bravo was in that league, and he wasn't there for a long time because that's from like 1981 to 1986 when he left. That's only 5 years, but it was 5 big years, and he was able to sell out the Montreal Forum, to not maybe selling out, but 14, 15, 20,000 people in the Montreal Forum, and selling out the Paul Sauvé Arena, and a big star on TV. He was my favorite wrestler when I grew up. I started watching wrestling in 1982, and he was my favorite wrestler. He was, and I say this in the documentary, and I got some critics online about that, but he was the Hulk Hogan of Quebec. He was really that. I know this sounds completely stupid, but he was the Hulk Hogan of Quebec from 1981 to 1986, and that's why the match between him and Hogan that never happened was something that. And that's why the match never happened, because Vince knew how Bravo, or understood how Bravo would be popular, was popular here in Montreal, and how it could affect Hogan's popularity. And, Vince always avoided big baby faces against, or guys that would be so popular. Remember that thing with Jake the Snake Roberts with Hogan? It was the same deal. The only one that he that was able to get a program with Hogan was Ultimate Warrior. But in 1986, Vince didn't want Hogan to be the second most popular wrestler to anyone. And Jerry Briscoe confirmed the story, and Jerry Briscoe told me that, we thought a riot would happen. That's also why we didn't want to do it. We thought that people would perhaps riot if, let's say, we put Hogan over Bravo, because I don't think Bravo would have, be over on Hogan, but still, so that's how, to be honest, I don't think there would have been a riot, but at the same time, that's how scared they was of that match, and they decided just to nix the idea and to put Bravo against somebody else and Hogan against somebody else, and that pissed off Dino, and that's why he didn't leave for WWF at the time. He left only in October of that year, because by then international wrestling was just going down and down, and the money was too good for Dino to refuse, to not go. But Bravo was he was charismatic, he was good on interviews, he was energetic, he was full of muscle, that big guy. that Italian blood in him, which when he was doing comebacks, he was all fire, and you could feel it at home, So he had really that he left really that impression on fans, and he had that program with Ricky Martel back in 82, 83. And they did matches in Montreal and in Quebec City, and Bravo was more popular than Martel in Quebec City. And to be from Montreal and be like in Quebec City, especially back in the 80s with that old hockey feud between the Montreal Canadiens and Quebec Nordiques, that was something. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard. I'm trying to explain it, and it's not the first time. I'm trying to explain it the best I can, but I know that there's still going to be people who say, "Oh, yeah, he's just exaggerating things." But it is a reality.
Absolutely. Just finishing up here, when you're finished watching this, do you, like, obviously, like, and this has been a theme throughout this season of Dark Side of the Ring, is that these people that are no longer around and those that are still alive that carry so much of that with them. And in this case, his widow, his daughter, that you just have so much that you feel so sorry for these people of what they've gone through. At the end of this, does Dino Bravo come across to you in any way as a sympathetic figure, or one that ultimately did make some bad choices that, had the ultimate cost that he had to pay at the end of this?
It's a personal opinion. And it depends. Some people will say, you know what? He did mistakes and he paid for it, and that's on him. Mm-hmm. And some people will just say, well, you know what? He did. He tried his best to give his family what he thought they deserve, and he took bad decisions, but I think getting Claudia to say I forgive him, to me, if you ask me, I think if Claudia can forgive him, I can forgive him too. You understand? So I think that Claudia helps, perhaps, that making people feel more, feel differently for Bravo. But there's always going to be people who will say, well, you know what, I'm not his, I just don't think he did the right choices, and people will keep their thoughts and opinions on Dino. He was at the end of the day, the story won't change. And for me, the important thing is that the family is in peace with everything. And if they are, well, I am too.
It does paint like a much fuller picture. Like, this is not just a black and white story. It's like, yes, he was involved in this aspect of his life, but this man, from these accounts, was a wonderful father. And like, that's the complicated picture that is this entire story.
What's your take on it?
I think that at the end of it, I think you look at a guy that was clearly had painted himself into a corner, and I understand, like, he went down a path that I think he just realized was, here's my quick fix to alleviate all of this, to keep a living for my family. And suddenly he realized, I'm in way too deep. And by that point, it was, it
was too late already.
It was too late at that point. I think so. And I definitely don't discount your theory about, here he is so deep. What's my only way out? It's wrestling. And do I make that call to Jacques about somehow getting my lifeline is pro wrestling? I think that's completely viable.
Yeah. And Dino wasn't made to be an organized crime. He was too prompt, he had that temper that didn't go well in that world, and he was very loud, and that doesn't go well either, So when you take a step back and look at this, he wasn't made for that world. He should have never got himself involved there, because of course he was going to rub people the wrong way at one point or another. But that's like I said, the documentary, there's not a lot of jobs when the only thing you did for the past 22 years is wrestling, and you made, probably millions of dollars. There's not a lot of jobs that will give you a 6 or 7 figure salary, number salary every year. So and it was probably the easiest thing to do, and so that's what he did. He didn't want to lose the lifestyle, because I've read some things online, that like, well, he should have sold the house, and he would have gotten money, and but it was just that was a Band-Aid. Selling the house would have been a Band-Aid, because he would have gotten money, but he would have been, it would have lasted just for that, a short period of time, and he would have ended up asking himself the same questions, but maybe 2 or 3 years later, and the only thing he could have done was wrestling. So to me, selling the house was just a Band-Aid, and he didn't want to lose that lifestyle. And I'm guessing, I never got that lifestyle, and I never had. I don't know about you, but I never had.
Wait a minute! I think Pat is just in the big house in Montreal, sitting back in his throne, putting back his latest biography that he's putting pen to paper on.
I wish, but I don't have an $850,000 house. I probably never will, so I don't know what it's like, to go from there. You know what it reminded me? Remember Rocky V, where Rocky just loses everything and go back to Philly in a shitty apartment and all that. That's that's what Bravo didn't want. That's what Bravo didn't want. He was used to a certain standards.
He wanted the lifestyle of Rocky III.
Oh, yeah. And
that's what he was accustomed to. And also like a very proud man, that I think that idea of, selling the house, I think that was something that was, this was from all accounts, a man that had an enormous amount of pride in, these status symbols.
Yeah, exactly. So, at the end of the day, it's, we won't change the ending of that story, but I was just glad to see that both Claudia and Diane were in peace with this, and they were glad that they had to share their thoughts and their souvenirs of memories. Of Dino. And so if anyone wants to see the documentary, it's a well told story. But just one thing: if you're watching it thinking that you're gonna find who did it at the end, don't watch it. That's not what the story is about. So that was one of my concerns, actually. I was like, there's so much hype about it, and what if all this hype is about, we'll finally know who shot Bravo, like who shot JR, and then that's not what the story was about. So, but other than that, I thought it was, very well done. The guy who impersonated Bravo, wow, props to whoever found that guy, because he really looked. It was mind-boggling how close to Dino he looked, in the ring and everything with Hogan in front of him. So, I think really, I'll say again, Evan and Jason really did a great job on it, and then so I was really another thing that I was really proud to be a part of.
Well, I'm really glad that you were involved, because you were a very important part of that episode. And once again, the book is The Eighth Wonder of the World: The True Story of Andre the Giant, with Bertrand Hebert and Pat Laprade. And I really realized you two have made it when I did get my advance copy, thankfully. But then last week, in comes the hardcover version, and might I say, what a beautiful hardcover this is, Pat. I mean, that is the symbol of excellence in books. You got the hardcover.
Yeah. No. And I was really proud. That was my first one. It's Bertrand's second because accepted the biography of Pat Patterson was a hardcover as well. But now it's a 420-page book hardcover with more than 100 pictures, so that's next level hardcover thing. So we're very, very proud. And one thing that I want to mention, John, is with everything that's going on, Amazon is it's a tough way to buy the book right now because it's just because of the shipping thing. It's hard to get books to Amazon warehouses. So if you're in Canada, Indigo.ca is the shipping is very good from what I hear. And may I suggest ECW Press website because if you buy the physical book, you'll get the ebook for free. There's a way to get it. If you go on the website, you can find how to do that. But you send your proof of payment, and you'll get the ebook for free. So you can actually start reading the book while it's being mailed to you. So even if it takes longer because of the crisis, you can start reading it, and you get 2 for 1. So and if you're in the States, Barnes and Noble website is probably the best way to get the book. So in the time being, Amazon is just a little more tricky. Yeah.
It's on my must-read list for all listeners out there. I highly recommend this book. I learned so much about Andre in this book. So this is one to absolutely go out of your way to check out. And that's a great option there. Indigo.ca, ECW Press, and you get the free ebook. So who can complain about that? And, this book, it's got the machine behind it because, as a wise man once said, good looks do sell books. And Pat Laprade, you are heavy in that department. So I hope that the sales all come your way.
You're too kind, John. Thank you so much. And if people want to follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, Pat Laprade, easy to find. And I'm always glad to talk some wrestling with you guys.